Well, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, it's as elusive as the search for the fountain of youth. For 40 years, we've been talking in the state of Pennsylvania about property tax relief. A bill has passed the state house. It currently resides in the Senate that provides some possibility of property tax relief. We have the lawmaker who's the chief sponsor of that bill on the program coming up shortly. But first, what's going on in the state legislature? Big topics of the week. Two of the state's leading reporters will weigh in on them after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, before we get to the big subject of property tax relief, and as I said, it's 40 years up and down and some minor modification, but a big proposal has passed the State House. We'll get into that with Representative Seth Grove from York County. But before we do that, joining me is Brad Bumsted with the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, Tony Romeo, KYW, KDKA Radio, both veteran journalists who've been covering the Capitol for a long, long time. All right, Tony, let me start with you. We're back to transportation. It looks like if anything is going to happen on it, you know, there's a $2.5 billion proposal that's passed the state Senate. It's over in the state house. Roads, bridges, mass transit. It's been hotly debated. And now it looks like some possibility of movement, and it may be connected to some, you know, nothing ever is simple in the legislature, right?
No, nothing.
Help us out here.
Well, basically, the Senate passed a bill back in June, which is too rich for the tastes of House Republicans, not enough for some House Democrats.
Yeah.
So you have the argument or debate over the level of spending, and then more recently, the issue that's come into prominence for the Republicans, if they want to give up their votes for any kind of tax or fee increase that is unpopular with them, is reforms to prevailing wage. And that's where things are right now. All that's tied up in the discussion, and we have gotten indications from House Republican leaders that this is do or die. If we don't get this done next week, the issue may be off the table.
Yeah, I mean, Brad, you've covered these property tax stories endlessly, as well as this whole business of transportation. We have to go back to, I think, 1997, the last time the state. Then there was some connection to the governor releasing money for the Philadelphia schools, some $45 million. What's that about?
Supposedly.
Supposedly, yeah, okay, add that in.
And I think the way to put it, I did talk to two different legislative staffers who told me that it was a prerequisite for House Democrats that had to happen before they would look at, you know, but there was no deal, and it was not part of any deal, according to not only the governor's office, but other legislative leaders, including House Majority Leader Mike Turzai. So maybe it was a step, maybe it was linked to it somehow, but not officially and not in a big way.
Yeah. Do you agree? I mean, again, you've covered these stories. Is transportation at that critical juncture? I mean, undoubtedly, in the polls that I've and others done, the voters want transportation done. They're willing to pay a little more gasoline prices, which would go up. I think we all agree there. You agree with that? They go up.
Yeah, it's hard to believe they wouldn't.
Yeah, how much, you know, remains to be seen.
What they want to do is tax wholesale gasoline.
Right.
And, of course, the argument is whether or not it would be passed along. You have to believe at least some of it would.
It would get passed along. So is it impossible to do it next year in an election year if it's not done this year?
I would say it is, because I just can't imagine Republicans, especially in some of the more conservative districts, voting for what amounts to a tax increase, especially if you then go further than what has been proposed involving taxing wholesale gasoline. And as the Senate did, you want to raise vehicle registration and license fees. No one would know better than you how unlikely that would be in an election.
Yeah. Brad, you agree with that?
Absolutely
You think we're up to that point where it's do or die?
Not necessarily next week. There are some session days later this year where it still conceivably could be done, or they can add on a couple days. But if it's not done by December, it's not going to happen.
It won't be done next.
And the majority leader of the House this week said several times when he talked with reporters that he wanted to bring the issue to a head. His spokesman had several days before indicated that next week is it. If they don't get it done, it's likely off the table for the rest of the session. when we talked to him, the majority leader, a couple of days later, he wouldn't confirm that.
He wouldn't confirm that.
Right, and they kept saying initially that October the 15th, this past week, was when the governor wanted to vote it, and it didn't happen then.
Right.
Now they're talking about supposed deadline next week, and it may not happen then either.
My sense is, as the majority leader said, he wants to bring it to a head, and if it doesn't happen next week, that doesn't, however, mean it won't continue to live.
All right, the conclusion here is transportation, 3 gubernatorial commissions have recommended something between $1.8 billion and $3.5 billion. The bill that passed the Senate, $2.5 billion. The big debate is probably also attached, I think, to the question of not will they pass something, but how much will be involved in the passage, meaning will be a smaller amount. And then there's an additional question of the relationship between mass transit funding that Democrats tend to support, roads and, am I right so far, Brad?
Absolutely, and in terms of the amounts, Majority Leader Terzai wants to do a $500 million bill to do primarily bridge repairs, and contrast that with $2.5 billion.
Won't get a single Democratic vote for that, will they?
No,
Guys,
it's a low ball offer. Clearly.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, should judges be able to serve until they're 75? Right now, the law, actually the Constitution, Brad will correct me if I'm wrong, says 70, 75. Is 70 really the new 50? We'll find out after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back with Tony Romeo and Brad Bumsted, both two of the state's leading journalists. We're going to find, is that, what, 70's the new 50, Brad? Is that what they're trying to tell us on the court?
Well, yeah, they are telling us that in a way. The state Senate this week approved a bill that's part of a constitutional amendment change and has to be approved next session, 2014-15, by the House and Senate again, and then be approved by the voters to go on the ballot. And if it's approved, it would raise the maximum age for a judge retirement from 70 to 75. Currently in the Constitution, it's 70. It would be 75. Yeah. And, you know, the argument.
They do have senior status, right? I mean, they can continue to serve.
But there are 86 judges only doing senior status, but they can for Superior and Commonwealth Court.
Okay. Any reluctance, you think? I mean, there is some concern, I think, about aging and, you know, mental deterioration, physical deterioration. I don't know. That's a tough call. I mean, we've all had, you know.
I would simply point out it's a heavy lift. It's a long way off. You have to have this bill passed by both chambers in the House and Senate in two successive sessions. So it's a couple of years off.
And then the voters would have to agree to, and we know. Well, it depends. Pennsylvania has what, the 4th oldest population now. Maybe maybe the seniors will look at it and say, "No, I'm too old. I couldn't do it."
And we're not unique. There are more than 20 states or so that have these kind of limits at between 70 and 75. Yeah. But federal judges have no limit whatsoever in terms of age, and many of them serve into their late 70s and 80s.
All right, I do want to. You've been doing some stories on this whole business of pharmaceuticals and. About regulations again. What's that all about?
Well, the issue here is about creating a database that doctors can check to try to stop pill shopping, where scammers go around from doctor to doctor claiming they have pain, getting prescription for narcotics and other drugs, going to another doctor and doing the same thing. Supposedly, all the other states around us have this database. However, there was a big issue about an amendment that would have the Attorney General be notified if there was any suspicious activity in the database.
Just suspicious activity, no question of whether it's wrongdoing or not.
Well, I mean, the idea would be that
The
activity
idea that it would be.
would suggest there was wrongdoing. The medical community had balked at that. An amendment that satisfied them was passed, but the new wrinkle was another amendment that was passed that for some drugs in this database, there would have to be a probable cause for law enforcement to access it.
They can't get me. I've got to take that baby asprin every day, right, guys?
You won't be in the database.
I won't.
with
I
that.
won't be in the database for that.
But I mean, the interesting thing about it is that the civil libertarians are very concerned about this, and based on what happened with the amendment process, there's still probably a ways to go on this.
And then there's always, I mean, Brad, we've been through this on voter ID laws. We've been through it on all sorts of other databases. You've covered these stories where the privacy and security and who gets that information. Is that another one of those potentially hot button areas?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, how many times have you heard about different databases being tapped into, hacked, and then all of a sudden there's concern over all the information that's in there? It happens a couple times a year.
Yeah. All right, before I let you guys go, I want to ask you a question. I'll ask both of you this question. Transportation funding, a couple of amendments here and there. Is the legislature going to do anything, pension reform, privatization? I'm tired of doing these stories. Either do something or don't do something. Anything big that you can think of? You think they're likely to tackle that?
No.
No. That was a short answer, Brad.
I tend to agree with them. I'd give them a little more. I'd give it a little bit of a chance on transportation, but not much. I think they've already come to a realization they may have to do a lot of small things.
So
and
it's
try to
small
add those
ball.
up.
You agree?
Yeah.
It's small ball for the next couple of weeks. Well,
Yeah, I'm with Brad. I think that there's an outside chance that something comes together on transportation.
Well, they're going to go out for several weeks before the municipal elections, and then they come back for a week or two, and then.
Right.
Well, they're here for a couple of weeks in November and December.
Yeah. So they're in a little longer because their own elections are not until next year. Is that correct?
Yes, and at least in the House, they'll be able to say they voted for property tax reform,
Property tax reform.
even if it's optional in terms of a bill that went to the Senate, and even if the Senate doesn't pass
There
it.
you go. That's a great segue to my next guest. Representative Seth Grove has a bill passed the House, over in the Senate. We'll see what happens. I'm going to have him explain it. We'll see what the ups and downs are about that. We will do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, welcome back. Well, joining me is Seth Grove. He's a State House member from York County. We'll use a number 196, but we just say he's a Republican from York County. That's okay with you, isn't it?
Perfectly fine.
All right. Now, look, you've done something fairly remarkable. You got a bill out of the State House that talks about property tax relief. We go back to the lottery days of the early 70s when we began to talk about this. And we had actually the voters went to the polls during the Casey administration that far back, turned down a broad state plan, get rid of all the state property taxes, right?
Yep.
And increase sales and income tax.
Yep.
A similar proposal went down in the House prior to the passage of your legislation. Am I right so far? I got this all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Seth Grove, you're on the program. Go over, give us 3 or 4 of the highlights of your bill, that bipartisan bill that passed the House. What does it do?
Yeah, very simply, it gives school districts options to eliminate, reduce, or do nothing on their school property taxes. And that's critical because property tax isn't a statewide problem. We've seen, as you mentioned, statewide electorate saying no thank you. Statewide, we had plans fail after fail. I mean, the alternative statewide bill has failed every single time it's brought forth in the General Assembly. This last time it has the lowest vote count it has ever had.
Yeah.
Reasons behind that, but it's just a simple fact. When I came in as a freshman, #1 issue in my district, how do I resolve this? with the playing field that I have. So I viewed local option as the way for those members in the state that don't have an issue, don't hear about it. The local option allows them to help us without them affecting their local school
Okay, so here's
districts.
the question. And okay, by local option, you mean that under your bill, a school district
Yep.
would be permitted to use, if I understand it, one and or
Yep.
of 3 different taxes.
Yep.
Raise those taxes, eliminate the property tax to balance off for the revenue. Do I got that right?
Exactly.
Now, I read this, and help me out here. Some of these taxes I understand. What are the 3? As simply as you can do
The
this.
simple one most people are familiar with is the
The
earned income tax. There's only 84 school districts that don't have it. They're usually around the Philadelphia area because of the Philadelphia wage tax. So that's a known entity. Most people understand that. The other 2, school districts and local governments used to be able to do, but in 1988, the General Assembly froze it. So if you currently have it, you can use it. If you didn't have it, it's not eligible. And that's probably part of the problem is the General Assembly has stripped away local governments, school districts' ability of other taxing sources.
Taxes, okay.
So we're looking at only property taxes as their main source of revenue. The other 2 are mercantile tax and business privilege tax. Mercantile tax has been around since the late 1700s. By academics, it's considered the United States' first sales tax, but it's a gross receipts tax. So think about Delaware. Delaware has a gross receipts tax. They say shop here, sales tax free. But when you go and shop, you're still paying the tax because it's buried in the price of the product.
I got
That's
it.
what gross
so you
receipts
tax
taxes
the company generically, and then they pass it along in what they sell.
Yeah.
Do I got that right?
Yeah. The entire tax won't be passed along
I
because
got
they
it.
still have the market
Yeah.
price, so some
Right.
is,
Sure,
some aren't.
sure.
So it's
Some of
still
it
it's
gets
still
passed
built into that same sales tax concept where you're trying to create a broad tax there. And what's nice is they're stable tax revenues. Nothing is as stable as a property tax, but EIT grows naturally with the economy. Actually, if we had a earned income tax, if we remove kind of like the investment side of our personal income tax, we wouldn't have such a huge state hit. So,
All right, in the poll, and I've done these polls, and others have done the poll, there isn't any doubt that voters find the property tax the most heinous tax.
Yep.
I mean, it's a tax they hate the most. But, now here we go to the but, it's predictable.
Yep.
It's reliable. If you revert to other taxes, is it less certain about what income, for example, schools would get?
Because it's a gross receipts tax and it's an earned income tax, they are stable revenue sources. Nothing is as stable as property taxes. I will highlight that because here's your bill, you have to pay it. The other nice thing about the alternative taxes, and we call it elimination tax, those 3, they grow naturally with the economy. Right. To get any new revenue for school districts who have increasing costs every year, they have to raise the millage rate unless counties reassess or a developer comes in and does development in an entity. And that's part of my big problem with property taxes is that to fund school districts, you have to raise rates. The alternative taxing sources allow the economy to do it for you. For instance, the federal government and the state government, we don't have property taxes. We have taxes that grow naturally with the economy. So our 3.07% income tax continues to grow.
All right, I'm talking with Representative Seth Grove about his property tax reform bill. It's passed the House bipartisan. It's over in the Senate. What's going to happen over there? I want to ask a state House member to predict what's going to happen in the Senate. That may be an unfair question, but I'm sure he can answer it. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Well, welcome back. I'm talking with Representative Seth Grove from York County. He's a Republican. He's got a bill that would reform or actually change some of the ways in which we use taxes to support our local schools away from property taxes. His bill passed the House bipartisan. It's now over in the Senate where its fate is uncertain. I think that you may correct me on that. I think that's fair. It seems like the House and the Senate are never on the same page when it comes to what to do. Over in the Senate Majority Leader wants to freeze property taxes for seniors and perhaps use Keno, which they'd have to authorize, to pay for the loss of the revenue. What's your sense about what's going? Have you been chatting with your colleagues over there? Where do you think this goes?
Yeah, obviously they're smart, dedicated professionals. Please move my bill.
I got it. I understand. Sure.
I think there's when you talk about property taxes, it hits seniors the most. So I think they're looking at a little more narrowly scoped deal. The problem is when you look at a statewide solution, it's the long-term growth of property taxes that have always outpaced our local tax revenues. So the hard part with the senior freeze is it may be small money the first year,
but it grows.
It compounds year after year. And we don't have a funding source statewide that keeps up with that growth. Now, when you're talking about seniors, there's looking at data from the property tax rent rebate, because seniors will eventually pass away at some point. It's almost like a natural cost containment mechanism within that. The problem is we have baby boomers. And if you look at IFO reports looking at our cohorts of age, we're looking at huge increases in our senior population where that might not be true anymore. The other aspect is really when you're targeting those individuals alone, and I think that's probably the most vocal aspect of the property tax issue. You're still leaving out individuals and you're still not looking at the funding scheme of local school districts.
Right.
That's why I do like my plan, because it's a new revenue source that grows naturally with the economy.
Yeah, one of the things, just to go further into your plan, is every time you talk about tax relief, it produces winners and losers.
Absolutely.
So the winners would be, property tax owners under your plan. The losers, they argue, would be some people in the business community.
I would say,
and you've heard that. I'm not saying anything you haven't heard, right?
The business community has always opposed any kind of tax shifting whatsoever. But it usually breaks down to renters, whether you're a residential renter or you're a business renter. Those are the people that would pay more under any tax shift. Those who own property would see their property taxes reduced and a new form of tax coming online. And I think that's the big weighing of what you do locally, because renters are traditionally low income. If you want to move people into buying a house, usually if you talk to any realtor, the biggest inhibitor of home sales is actually those.
We have about a minute left. As you pointed out, however, some school districts have serious property tax problems. Maybe it's because they have lots of tax-exempt property. You hear when mayors come on this, I hear that. Other districts are well off. The property tax isn't an issue. Is that another part of the problem, is how the property tax affects people differently?
Absolutely. You have areas of the state that have a higher earned income tax, so the natural growth of the EIT allows them not to raise property taxes, and that's the case. Look at Ohio. Income taxes in that area have reduced property taxes. By moving it over to gross receipts, earned income tax, you remove that out of it because you're not looking at property, you're not worrying about exempt property. So another reason it's going to be good.
Well, thanks for coming on. I think you provided a pretty clear explanation. We'll see what happens over in the Senate. Thanks for doing this. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.